So thank you everyone for coming here today. Professor Jerry Davis is the Gilbert and Ruth Whitaker Professor of Business Administration at the Ross School of Business, as well as Professor of Sociology, both at the University of Michigan. Davis received his PhD from the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. His books include Social Movements and Organization Theory, Organizations and Organizing, Rational, Natural, and Open System Perspectives, Managed by the Markets, How Finance Reshaped America, and Changing Your Company from the Inside Out, a guide for social entrepreneurs. Davis's research is broadly concerned with the corporation as a social and economic vehicle, as well as the effects of finance and society. He's been a leading voice on financialization and the role of corporate power in the US economy, and his work has clear resonance, obviously, with scholars here in health policy, public health, healthcare delivery, and health services research. As major economic changes have transformed the healthcare landscape, his research addresses profound questions that those in this community are deeply grappling with. For example, whether shareholder capitalism is still a viable option for economic development, or whether income inequality in an economy is related to corporate size and structure, or even whether there are viable organizational alternatives to shareholder-owned corporations in the US. Obviously, this has profound implications for how health access, health equity, and population health operates and exists within our country. So I'm really delighted to welcome Professor Davis as the speaker for the Michael Davis Lecture Series. I believe no familial relationship between Michael Davis. So anyway, thank you very much, and this is a real treat for us.
Thanks for coming. Whoa, damn. Okay, better. I mean, heavens. Great to see you all. I will encourage you, if you can't hear me, to come down this direction, but I did have pesto for dinner last night, so I can understand why you might want to stay a few blocks away. It's quite delicious. This talk is going to feel like a random shaggy dog story relative to the other things that you've done this semester. So healthcare comes up on about one slide. Sorry about that, but I'll do my best. I think it's still got some broad relevance, because it's going to have one big old theme that'll emerge about midway through the talk, and you'll see the relevance, I think, to pretty much anything that we all are thinking about organized human action. I love to have metaphors and art in my talks, and I'm going to start with a mysterious one. This is a painting that I saw just this Saturday for the 100th time at the Detroit Institute of Arts. It's called Girl with Flower by Fernand Léger from 1954. And I really love this painting. And I'm going to tell you it's a metaphor for the talk, but I'm not going to tell you how until the 80% mark. So observe this thing. It's got a picture of this woman's head, sort of with her interesting features, and she's got a necklace and a shawl and this collar, and then this weird jagged looking flower, and it's very elaborate. And then you've got these very simple looking color blocks in childlike colors of yellow and red and blue and green. So I'm not going to tell you what the metaphor is, but you can contemplate what could this thing stand for. Then partway through the talk, I will tell you what I was thinking about. So talk's going to be a shaggy dog story, where I'm going to end up recanting what I wrote in my last book, which is very atypical for me. So that's what we're up to. Okay. And what I've been thinking about for the last few years is, how do we understand the new nature of corporate power? How is corporate power of the sort we see today different from what we saw a century ago? We keep hearing that we're living through a new Gilded Age, but it feels to me like it's a pretty different flavor of Gilded Age. It isn't even gold, it's like cryptocurrency. And so how do we understand the sources and nature of corporate power today? So I'm going to be taking you along on my peculiar journey to try to get at that question. This is a sentence that the people under the age of 30 will understand. I'm using Robinhood on my Android to trade Dogecoin, which is a meme-based sarcastic cryptocurrency. I swear to people in my elderly demographic, this is a meaningful sentence in English with actual reference. So imagine trying to explain this sentence to somebody in 1990, before most of you were born, before the web, internet memes, smartphones, apps, cryptocurrency, imagine trying to unpack that sentence the year that I got my PhD, which was a long time ago. All right, now imagine explaining it to the 1890 US Congress that passed the Sherman Act. That's kind of where we are, that we're operating in a weird realm with very strange phenomena and a different ontology and trying to use tools from over a century ago to unpack them. Okay, that's to set up the Shaggy Dog story. So 2 books back, a few years ago, I published this book called The Vanishing American Corporation. I'm going to give you the punchline so you don't have to read it or encounter it. And the title seems mysterious, Vanishing Corporation, because everybody knows corporations are everywhere like PFAS in the water. They're never going away. They're always going to be there in our blood and everything else. And the puzzle of the book is, why are public corporations in the US vanishing? Public meaning listed on the stock market, the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. First, they really are disappearing. There's a lot fewer of them than there used to be. There's about half as many now as there were 25 years ago. It dropped by a lot over about 12 years, and it never came back. So there's a lot fewer public corporations than there used to be. And it turns out I am not the only one that noticed this. I first started writing about it in 2010. In the most recent JP Morgan Chase annual report, Jamie Dimon's letter to shareholders, if I can read this, the diminishing role of public companies. There's a lot fewer of them. This trend is serious and may very well increase with more regulation and litigation coming. Along with a frank assessment, we really need to consider, is this the outcome we want? And there's a whole section talking about why this could be bad. And speaking earlier with Colleen, like one of the reasons this might be bad is public corporations have to tell you a lot about what they're doing. Private equity doesn't have to tell you jack. They can do all kinds of crazy things and not disclose it. Public corporations, they have to issue quarterly and annual reports and explain themselves a bit. How much are they paying the CEO? How many employees do they have? So there's at least some transparency. That's one of the potential concerns about disappearing public corporations. If you track the antitrust narrative, you'd say, well, that's just because they're all buying each other up. Big companies, oligopolies are buying each other up and becoming monopolies. Turns out this is not true. I don't have an hour to tell you why that's not exactly what's going on. I can point you to some of my literature, but it varies a lot by industry, like internet bubble, banking, a bunch of banks collapsed in 2008, offshoring of electronics, big pharma is kind of a vortex, but it gets replenished by biotech. There's not one story about industries becoming more consolidated. I'm going to drill down on that a bit during the talk. One way to think about this is think about what was corporate America like in Ronald Reagan's last year in office. So in 1988, what did big business look like? This is the Dow Jones blue chips in 1988, and it's a bunch of names that only those of us over 50 recognize. I find it like, to me, this was the corporate world, and you ask any young person, Woolworth, like, do they make sweaters? Or Eastman Kodak, what a fun name. So things that were like the pillars of the economy for the 20th century are mostly gone. If you fast forward to today, most of those sort of big companies are no longer listed in the Dow. Most of them have actually disappeared or will soon be dead. So the ones in red are still listed on the index, but this is kind of like going to your 30-year high school reunion to see what became of the football team. Like the people that used to be the ballers, like the most popular kids in school that had, that were sort of could strut, and you go back and look at them now and say, dang, like half of them are dead, bunch of them are in prison, they're in halfway houses, and GE used to be the quarterback, but now it's kind of, morbidly obese and, in a halfway house. And it's kind of weird to see what became of the big businesses. So it doesn't feel like Reagan wins, big business wins, end of story, because this does not seem consistent with that sort of simple narrative. And if you're a Schumpeter fan, being at the University of Chicago, you might say, yay, creative destruction, big companies go away and startups emerge. And and make the world a better place by being super innovative. That's not really true either. The IPO fad of the 1990s has never come back. We had this little blip around 2021, but in the last 2 years, there have been disastrously few IPOs, and I don't expect this to change a lot. We're just not seeing the creation of new public corporations the way that we used to. The ones that did come out in the last couple of years have mostly been a disaster. 87% of the companies that went public in 2021 were trading well below their IPO price within a year and a half. And this has not come back. So it's really a weird time for publicly listed corporations. If you're an amateur social scientist like myself, you'd say, well, why do we have these things in the first place? Like, why do we even have publicly listed corporations? What was their purpose? And the answer probably emerged from a building, 2 buildings over when Ronald Coase was at the, hanging around the University of Chicago. Before he got his Nobel Prize, he published basically 2 papers, and they were both considered pretty good. It took about 3 decades for each one to come out. But his first famous paper tried to explain the emergence of organizations and firms in terms of transaction costs. So the puzzle, why do we have, we economists know that markets are awesome and they allocate resources to their highest valued use, then why do you have firms where the same people show up day in and day out doing the same job like that? Why don't we have markets all the way down? And his answer had to do with transaction costs, that free markets are great, but using free markets is not itself free. So it's great to have markets, but you have to go shopping and you have to find parking and go from store to store and negotiate with the person and maybe bring in a lawyer to haggle, and you have to have guarantees and you have to be able to take it back if it's not right. So there's a lot of transaction costs. It's not just the transaction itself. There's costs associated with using markets, and that has to be taken into account in explaining why do we have things like firms. The main reason it's profitable to establish a firm would seem to be that there's a cost of using the price mechanism. Most obvious cost of organizing production to the price mechanism is that of discovering what the relevant prices are. Just figuring out how much does something cost is itself costly. There's an expense to figuring that out. So for Coase, this helped explain something like this. The Ford River Rouge plant. It's a picture from about 1940. At that time, both my grandfathers were welders working in this factory. They'd moved to Detroit to make their fortune making Model Ts. They worked at this factory as welders. And this thing made steel and glass, and they brought in rubber from Ford's rubber plantation in Brazil, thoroughly vertically integrated. Coase could explain why does it look like this rather than 100,000 separate firms transacting. So that was the story. So imagine if you're Ronald Coase, what if everybody carried a tiny supercomputer communicator that allowed them to look up the prices for everything in the world all day, every day? They could create contracts and track their performance in real time. Imagine a thought experiment where everybody can communicate prices basically for free. That is the thought experiment that we're living through now. So this is Ronald Coase's weird thought experiment come to life, because we can all communicate and track each other's behaviors and negotiate online. If you're Coase, the answer is going to be really straightforward. You're going to get the pervasive outsourcing of the production of goods and services. You're going to go from hierarchies back to markets, where you use the market to transact for things rather than doing things internally. I call this Nikeification. I now own this word. If you Google it, you'll see that I get all of the top pings for the word Nikeification. I don't get any royalties yet, but Nike famously, they never made sneakers. From when Philip Knight started this company, the whole plan was always import sneakers from East Asia and put our logo on them. So they design, they do the idea work, other people do the heavy lifting. The American economy is now fully Nikeified, particularly since the 1990s and China joining the WTO in, I don't know, November 2001 or so. The US economy is heavily Nikeified. It's really hard to find a product in the US actually manufactured by the company whose name is on the label. I love the example of Vizio. because by 2007, it was a best-selling flat-screen television in America, like handily beating Sony, which had been in this business forever. And it only had 196 employees in Irvine, California. They contracted out to a Taiwanese vendor to manufacture it and Costco to distribute it. And because they were a lot cheaper than Sony, they kind of won the battle. Instant Pot, the greatest invention of the 21st century by far. Computer nerds, this is the Python of cooking. Because like, in Python, if you're ever wondering, how do I write a snippet of code to do this? Someone's already done it and you can download it. Same thing for recipes on the Instant Pot. It's like, I got a bunch of lentils and some carrots. What can I make? There's going to be someone that posts a recipe on that. And the guy that started this thing did it entirely with his own money, is a computer science PhD, created a $300 million product category, but they only employed 50 people in Ottawa by 2018. So huge success, listing it on Amazon, but almost no employees. I have a Windows Microsoft Surface PC. The power supply breaks about once every 2 months. I've bought a dozen replacements. If you go look these things up on Amazon, you will see over 300 different vendors selling essentially the identical product, ranging in price from $3.50 to $150, which is insane. Zoom, which we all use like right now, we're always using Zoom, 300 million users, but only about 7,200 employees, which is about 2% of the number that work at Home Depot, and they rent server space from Amazon and Oracle. So the economy is fully Nikefied. Coase's vision has come true. People rent the parts of a business. You might reasonably say, sure, but obviously this doesn't matter for heavy industry like, say, autos or jetliners. Like, no one would think to Nikefy Boeing's production, right? I have a response to this. So the River Rouge plant today, where my grandfathers were welders, produces the Ford F-150 pickup truck in this lovely green facility that you can actually visit and walk through the factory. One of the competitors to the Ford F-150 electric pickup truck was the Fisker Alaska. So Fisker is a publicly listed car company in the US that had 3 models of car that they've sort of rolled out. And what made the company especially interesting was that the founder said only an idiot would build a car factory today. There's already a bunch of car factories out there. The real money is in design and marketing, and we're really good at that. And so he contracted with Magna to make their first model and Foxconn, assembler of the Apple iPhone, to make their second and third models. So the same people making the Apple phones would be making Fisker cars. And according to their last filed 10K, Fisker had approximately 850 full-time employees. So even a car company in the US can look like Nike. So that is the disaggregation of the production economy. To me, this is really important. This has been this is sort of one of the big tales of the last generation, is the full-scale Nikeification or disaggregation of production. Weird thing about the car company thing is, if you want to start one in your dorm, you can do this. If you'd asked me in 2004 how many US car companies are there going to be 20 years from now, I would have said 2, maybe 1, but no more than 2. And the correct answer is 14. Anybody can start a car company now because there are factories willing to make cars with your design on them. So these are just the publicly listed car companies, not the ones that have not gone public yet. Canoo, Centro, Faraday, Future, Fisker. There's a lot of little tiny car companies out there, just like in 1910. Weird, right? Okay, I hope I've convinced you the economy does not look the way that we imagined it to be when we were thinking of a bunch of giant businesses. This works for suppliers. What about labor? There really is an Uber for everything now, and I'm gonna use the term Uberization to refer not just to getting a cab to the airport, but using online technology to contract for specific tasks. So rather than hiring an employer, paying people by the shift or by the task. And it might be using a smartphone or it might be in some other form, but the ability to say, here are the jobs to be done, as they say in business school, or here are the tasks I need accomplished, bid for them. And I will hire you to design this logo for me or design this new car for me. So that's what I mean by Uberization, creating a spot market for labor. If you've ever been to a Home Depot at 6 a.m., you see there's a big crowd of young gentlemen hanging out in the corner. Spot markets for labor have been around forever. The idea of hiring people by the day, that's been around forever. What's different about Uberization is that the world is turned into a spot labor market, that you can hire people around the world on your phone to do specific tasks. And it's not just for simple tasks like drive me to the airport. It can be for very complex tasks like do this spinal surgery on me. I think healthcare has got to be one of the weirdest transformations enabled by Uberization. My buddy Woody Powell was waiting for very serious spinal surgery at Stanford's hospital, and he asked the people waiting, the head surgeon was not there yet, asked the people, so where do you all live? And two of them said, we live in Oklahoma. One said, we live in Georgia. They fly in from around the country to do shifts, to get paid by the shift to do healthcare work in surgeries. Is this normal, Colleen?
But it's becoming, I think it's relatively new, but it's becoming much more, yeah.
And imagine you're about to get really serious surgery and you discover they're all basically Uber drivers with nursing degrees. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, they do have degrees. Yeah, they are, and they did wash their hands, so that was pretty good. But so much of healthcare after COVID is telehealth, like just calling up and getting a visit that way. That can be done anywhere in the world. Contract lawyers. I thought law was a fancy job. Turns out it's not. Don't go to law school if you were thinking about it, because a shocking amount of law is done by sad people in cubicles vetting contracts and is really not great work for people of your intelligence and thoughtfulness. That works for suppliers and labor. What about distribution? The answer is that Amazon is a universal distribution channel for absolutely everything. For better or worse, if you have any product in the world, you can distribute it through Amazon. Their take rate might be pretty high, but they do create distribution channels for pretty much everything. So summarizing all of this, but skipping the finance part, sorry about that. Information and communication technologies have drastically lowered the transaction costs that Coase talked about for accessing the core factor markets. So outsourcing production to suppliers, outsourcing distribution, use of spot markets for labor. As a result, the parts you need to create a business are like a pile of Legos waiting to be assembled. You got Legos, you get the Instant Pot. That's kind of where we are now. And you'll notice what I did there was try to take the perspective of the person creating an enterprise. So from the perspective of someone trying to start something up new, they are facing a whole bunch of Legos to snap together. So that's the way that the builders of enterprises, we normal people think they provide jobs or goods and I'm mad at them and I want to sue them or break them up, which is a fine way to think about enterprises. Another perspective is what is possible? If I'm an architect of possibility, what things for good or evil can be created using this pile of Legos? So I just wanted to insert that as a little thought there. Now, of course, you throw in generative AI, and it turns out that all of that stuff I talked about are radically speeding up. You could basically say, I got an idea for a product. Come up with 10 designs. All right, hire me someone on Upwork to evaluate the designs and realize the best one. All right, once you've done that, find me a vendor on Alibaba that can manufacture this thing. All right, I want a distribution channel. Create an online store to see what people are clicking on and make more of those things. So now create a virtual ad with a fake person with a really appealing voice. Come up with a good label for this thing. Like the whole schmear can be pretty much automated to GAI. So this is what our future, our not too distant future is going to be as you go to Amazon and 94% of the businesses are going to be AI generated bots where the whole business has no actual employees, but just bots that are good at hiring the parts and assembling them. Okay, that was my Cory Doctorow moment for you. For me, the most important thing about all, oh, any questions so far? Why wasn't I wearing Depends? Okay. Okay, great. We'll have a bunch of time for questions at the end. So from my perspective, the part of this that is most scarifying is, what does all this mean for employment? Like, I'm a tenured college professor. I don't have to care. The world can burn and I'll have my bolt hole in New Zealand next door to Peter Thiel or something like that, because most tenured professors, of course, have multiple citizenships and bolt holes in New Zealand. But what does this mean for the nature of employment? Like, where are the jobs going to be in a world that looks like this? You already know this, but I want to remind you of something that sometimes my business audiences say, no, that can't be right. America's biggest employers today are almost entirely in retail, not at the sort of fancy employers with the large firm wage premium. The modal employer in the US is in retail, and it turns out the money is not good. So publicly listed corporations are required to report their median annual compensation, and we can all look those figures up, so I did. Here's the 10 biggest corporate employers in the US and the median compensation. So Walmart about 21,000, Amazon 29,000, Starbucks 12,000. I mean, that's partly because it's global wages and some people are part-time, but that seems like a low number to me. At the GSB, that's the tip they leave after one of their fancy champagne dinners. So, but a lot of numbers somewhere below 30 as the median annual compensation for the retail employers. This is the one healthcare fact for you. Kaiser Family Foundation reports that the average annual premiums for employer-sponsored family health coverage were $22,221. So that was from a couple of years ago. So for an employer-provided head of household health insurance, it costs more than the average pay at the median pay at Walmart, comparable to Home Depot and Target and Kroger and Lowe's. So there's a reason why nobody wants to have employees, because employees cost money. If you have to add $24,000 to your bill to be able to employ people and provide health care, you're like, oop, 1099 for me. Not that we should think like employers, but that is a crazy number that nowhere in the civilized world happens, only in the US, as far as I know. Yeah, so anyway, welcome to America. Sorry. In contrast, the career employers, the inventor, arguably, one of the inventors of the American healthcare system was General Motors in the UAW with the Treaty of Detroit in 1950, where they guaranteed health coverage up through retirement. General Motors has 105,000 US workers left. Right now, there's a 100-year graph that I spent a surprising amount of time researching. They have about the same number of employees that they did in 1926. Nobody works at General Motors. We can stop thinking about them for a minute. Okay, so the shape of things to come. I think that one of the vanguard industries for thinking through how have all of these weird technological changes, how does it change the way that we get food? Because I'd say, I know this feels like a weird digression, but I swear it's going to be relevant. The food industry has gone through more changes in the last 5 years than maybe in the previous 2,000 years. It's really wild, and it's all happening in front of our eyes, but I just want to draw our attention to it because I think it's a harbinger of things that we're going to start to see in other industries like healthcare and education. Okay, so the pandemic accelerated our reliance on platforms a lot. This is another one of my thinly veiled metaphors. This is a screen standing between us. So that is my thinly veiled metaphor. This is great if you happen to be in one of the big companies that provides the screens, like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. They're doing really well. Their market cap is often nearly 30% of the value of the S&P 500. So mostly good news for them. Disastrous news for all the rest of us because we're now living through this Black Mirror episode enabled by this situation. So restaurants saw a really accelerated fruit fly-like evolutionary adaptation to the pandemic that other industries probably didn't. Homebound population's a disaster for restaurants. 100,000 of them closed in the first 6 months of the pandemic. That's why every downtown looks really sad now. Kind of like dinosaur hitting the earth and killing off all or the meteor hitting the earth, killing off the dinosaurs and leading to new species. The employment consequences were genuinely insane. I just want to remind us of what this looked like. In the month of March 2020, 5 million jobs were lost in restaurants in the US. 5 million jobs is like the population of Denmark lost their jobs in just this one sector of restaurants. And it's only in the last 2 months caught up to where it had been prior to this. So this is a very long-term loss of employment. For a lot of people, it's their first rung on the labor market. It's their entry point into paid employment. I would argue that restaurants may be the oldest kind of firm. So this is from Pompeii. Turns out they had fast food in Pompeii. Like normal working class people didn't have a kitchen in Pompeii. They got food from restaurants like this that would have hot plates and they could go sort of buy a plate there. So drive-thrus are nothing new. Fast food has actually been around for a good long while. Less appreciated, it was an Olive Garden. Endless soup and breadsticks. It was kind of an amazing innovation at Pompeii. Okay, so I lived in New York in the 1990s, and one of the best parts about living in New York at that time was that all of the restaurants delivered. So every day around 6, my toddler would say, "Daddy, what's the food guy bringing tonight?" Because his comprehension of where food came from was the guy at the door bringing us a bag of food. Pandemic spread that wonderful innovation to all of us because of DoorDash and Uber Eats and other delivery services. And the great thing about this is, from the vendor's perspective, nobody knows what happened between you ordering it online and the food arriving at your door. You know that something happened out there, but you can't really be sure exactly what happened between the app and the food showing up. One of the things that happened that I loved, on the internet, nobody knows your Chuck E. Cheese. If you found yourself ordering from Pasquale's Pizza and Wings, it turns out it's actually Chuck E. Cheese. Because no one would voluntarily order food from Chuck E. Cheese to be brought to their homes. It's like for their rodents, but not for the quality of the cuisine. Like children's birthday parties, yes, but Pasquale's Pizza and Wings sounds like a great local restaurant and you're helping your community thrive. Nope, it's Chuck E. Cheese. But nobody knows that between ordering. Well, that opened up some really interesting possibilities in the form of virtual restaurants, where existing kitchens could start cooking the menus from a bunch of other brands out there. So in California, in Menlo Park, and 2 blocks away, there was a Singaporean restaurant that also cooked proposition chicken from Oakland. It's like, weird combination, but they were cooking multiple different brands coming out of the same kitchen, kind of like Nike. There's now universal commissary kitchens like cloud kitchens. DoorDash is now vertically integrating back into producing and distributing the food for Wendy's and a few other brands. And so suddenly there's a disconnect between what you see on the menu and the food that shows up. It's kind of like Nike, but for food. Like you can have a brand and a bunch of recipes and then contract out absolutely everything else. If you're Mr. Beast and have a big following, you can launch Mr. Beast burgers without ever sitting near any of the food going out with your name on it. So that's a pretty different flavor of organization. I'm not sure that ghost kitchens are gonna last forever. Probably not. There's some sort of closure there. But I have to share with you the one most psychedelic example of what restaurants or what food businesses can look like today. So the kids apparently love this TikTok app. It's kind of like Twitter, but with videos, so you don't have to read, which is boring and old. Instead, you can just watch people talk at you on the screen. TikTok is really good at spawning different business models. And one of them, when food goes viral on TikTok, a lot of the time it's terrible and it's people doing implausible, dumb stuff that you shouldn't do. But sometimes it's actually good. That feta, like cherry tomato thing was really, really good. So TikTok's idea was find the food that goes viral, compile it into a menu, and allow people to order the food and pay for it on the TikTok app. And then, by the way, you cannot easily patent a recipe. If you put it out there on TikTok, anyone can steal it. You order and pay on the app, and then the order is routed to one of 1,000 ghost kitchens located around the country and then delivered to you by Grubhub. So I find this to be really, really psychedelic. The idea that TikTok can basically create a restaurant going nowhere near food by seeing just virtual recipes that their members post, turning that into a menu, charging people money, and then routing it to sort of a kitchen and a delivery. This is kind of like the Shein model as well, for fast fashion. That something that looks really different from traditional industrial organization is now becoming really widespread. We'll skip that. Once people started going back into actual restaurants, that model of ordering on your phone and then getting food to show up turned up in actual restaurants. I went to my favorite brew pub next door, and they had a gosh darn QR code sitting on the table. So instead of, hi, I'm Lauren, I'm gonna be taking care of you today, which is great and charming, it was just a QR code, and then some sad person running out, throwing the food at our table, and then we could just get up whenever we were done. Sad, but cheap. According to QR code vendors, you can cut 30 to 50% of labor costs by getting rid of waiters and having people do their own ordering and payment through this app. In the kitchen, they can't tell the difference whether it was a QR code or someone at home ordering through DoorDash. They're just producing food for 8 different restaurants. So this is the restaurant industry looking really radically different